Hello and welcome back to Studio Lab. In today's episode, what we are going to do is we're going to be making these simple fidget spinners. Okay, so to begin, today what we're going to do is first of all, we're going to look through the materials that we need. We're going to need our blank material. We're going to have sandpaper for sanding afterwards. We have tracing paper. We have our templates themselves. We also have these bearings, which are very important. These are what make the actual fidget spinner spin. We're going to use a glue gun to actually glue the items together at the end. And some other items that you will need is scissors, glue stick, pencil, and a simple chisel or tool used to punch a little hole. So to begin making our fidget spinner, the first thing that we have to look at is the actual templates ourselves. So everyone is going to receive this template in their pack. And you can see here from this example that we have 4 different designs. Okay, so depending on your ability or which one you've tried first, there is 4 examples here that we can work from. Okay, so I'm going to show you a few ways that we can mark this out. The first way is the easiest way, which is going to be using a pre-made template. Okay, so we're going to take our template, we're going to place it onto our piece of material. Now, before we start, it's very, very important that we understand the position of our template on the piece of wood. Okay, so I wouldn't just take my template now and place it in the center of my wood and mark it out, because I'm going to have lots of waste here. So if you do have a piece of material, please try and find the best possible position for your template. Okay, so for me, I'm going to mark it over here. Okay, so hold the template nice and steady, and what we're going to do is just mark it out using our pencil. Take your time. Okay, and there we have it. So there's a basic outline of our design using the pre-given templates. That's option number 1. If you want to be a small bit more challenged and you want to try and make it a bit harder for yourself, what we can do is we can take the template paper itself, all right, and what we're going to do is we're going to cut out the design we want. So for today's lesson, I'm going to go with option here, the one in the center, so this one. So what we're going to do is we're going to take out the template. We're just going to cut it out of my piece of paper. Okay, rough cuts, don't stick to the line just yet. Okay, so we've removed our template from the paper, and what we're going to do is we're going to use a glue stick and we're going to glue it directly onto our piece of wood. Okay, so again, same rules apply. When you have your piece of material, make sure that you find the best possible position. We wouldn't place it in the center here because we don't want to waste our wood. Okay, so again, into the corner. All we're going to do is take our glue stick, apply some glue to the back side of our template, and we're just going to stick that down. Okay, stick it down nice and firm, and we're going to have to give that a few minutes to dry. Okay, we want to make sure that the template and the glue is nice and dry before moving on to the machine itself. Okay, so that is going to be option number 2. Okay, the third and final option, which is probably the most advanced version, is where you're going to freehand draw the design from the template paper directly onto the piece of wood. Now, to do this option, what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to use this carbon paper or tracing paper. Okay, so when we look at the carbon paper itself, there is 2 sides. Okay, so one side you can see it has this writing, and the other side is plain blue. So it is the plain blue side that will transfer the design onto the wood. So the blue side, the plain blue side, needs to be placed down. Okay, then what we're going to do is take our paper itself, place it again, finding the correct position, make sure that it's not hanging off the piece of wood. So place it directly onto the piece of carbon paper, and you're going to trace the design using a pencil. Okay, so if I just show you, if I just make a mark like that, and I lift it up, what's after happening is after transferring that design straight onto the piece of wood. Okay, so for this option, you have to be very, very careful that you go nice and slow, because any line that you make is going to transfer directly onto the piece of wood. Okay, so taking your time, and just very carefully trace the outline of your design. Okay, so let's just check, make sure everything is, there we go. Okay, so now what I have done is I've transferred my design directly onto the wood. Okay, so these are our 3 options. So again, just to revise, option 1, using the template provided. Option 2 is cut out the design from the template and glue it directly to the piece of wood. And option 3 is to freehand draw the design using the carbon paper provided. Okay, so once you have placed your design onto the piece of material, the next step is to actually process it and actually cut it out. Okay, so before we actually move on and we cut out our detailed pattern, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to roughly cut out around our shape so it's a small bit smaller to manage on the machine. Okay, we don't want to have a big large piece of material and we're here trying to work on it on the machine. Okay, so step one is a rough cut just around where I have made this little pencil mark, just to make it a small bit easier to manage. Okay, when we come to the machine, of course, we must make sure we have our safety glasses. Okay, so safety glasses on, step number one. The machine, we're going to turn it on here. And again, as you know, please make sure that you are holding the material firmly onto the bed of the machine. Okay, we don't want it vibrating or moving. Okay, so here we go. Okay, so now you can see it's a small bit more manageable in size. So now we're actually going to look at removing the actual detailed edging of the fidget spinner. Okay, with this example, because it's a free-flowing curve and it's one continuous motion, if you are quite confident and you have a bit of experience using this machine, you can try and enter and you can work your way around the full entire design in one go. Okay, if this is your first time making a fidget spinner, what I advise you to do is to add in a few little relief cuts, is what we call them. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to cut these down using the machine, and you will see why in a minute this will help me. Okay, so I'm just going to do a number of little cuts. They are rough cuts again, they're just to help us. I'll just put one here too, and we'll move on after that. Okay, so there we have it. There you can see I've just cut out all of these little relief cuts around the edge of the fidget spinner. Now what's going to happen? When I am going to cut around my design, what's going to happen is all of these little pieces are going to fall off. Okay, if I didn't do these relief cuts before, as I come along here and I'm working my way around the design, if there was any issue, I have to try and back all the way back out where I started. So at least with this, what's going to happen is these little guys are going to fall off and it's going to give me a small bit more room to maneuver the piece as I'm cutting. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm just going to enter here and I'm just going to work my way along, and what should happen is you should see these little waste pieces of material pop off as we pass them. Okay, so here we go. Okay, so I've just completed cutting out my piece on the machine. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to take my sandpaper and I'm just going to give the edges a little rub of the sandpaper just to remove the rough edge that is created by the saw blade. Okay, so take your piece hold it somewhere firm, on the edge of the machine is fine, and just very carefully, and there you go. So, depending on the actual profile that you are using, it might be a bit difficult to get into some of the areas while sanding. So a little trick when sanding this piece, because of the shape, is what we do is we take the sandpaper itself, just fold it into a slight little curve like so, and you can see it's created a perfect little edge that will be able to get inside here at the edge of my sandpaper. Okay, so just work your way along, sanding where you need to sand. Okay, and there you go. So at this point, what we can do is there's a number of options. You can leave the paper on it, and you can actually paint it and do a design onto it. Some people like to completely remove the paper and have only used it for the cutting phase. So if you want to remove it, what you can do is take your sandpaper again. Okay, open your sandpaper out nice and flat. Take your fidget spinner, and you're just going to rub it nice and carefully. And what's going to happen is it's just going to remove the paper from the piece of wood. Okay, so we'll be left with just our blank piece of wood. So you can see now the paper is coming off. If I just show you, you can see what's happening. So don't be worried, just keep going. So the next step, what we have to do is we have to find the position for our bearing. So the bearing is very, very important when we are actually using our fidget spinner, because this is what gives it the function of being able to spin. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is we need to make sure that the bearing itself is positioned in the center. Okay, if it is not in the center, what might happen is it might be a bit unbalanced. So we have to find the very, very center. So take your bearing, okay, place your fidget spinner design straight down on the table, and using the bearing as a guide, okay, find the center, make sure it's nice and even. Take your pencil, and what we are going to do is just very carefully, we're going to mark around where the fidget spinner itself is going to go. Okay, so there we have it. So there is the position of our fidget spinner, of our bearing. So now, in order to cut out this material, so our final design is going to look something like this one. Okay, so we're going to have a hole in the center. In order to get to that point, what we have to do is we have to punch a little hole in the center of our fidget spinner first. Okay, we can't just cut directly in here, because we'll be cutting in through our fidget spinner. Okay, so what we have here is just this little piercing tool, okay, or a little chisel, and all we're going to do is very carefully, making sure that we have a scrap piece of material underneath. Okay, so just place it directly onto your table, make sure it's nice and firm. And what we're going to do is just take your chisel and just very carefully, okay, adding a little bit of force, and we're just going to try and pierce a small little hole. Okay, so just back and forth until you feel that it's gone through. Lift it up, have a look, and there you can see it is done. Okay, so for me, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to flip it over to the other side, just come through from this side as well. Now that I have cut out the hole for my blade, the next step is we're going to move back to the machine and we're going to try and cut this section out. It is very, very important that we have the correct size, because we don't want the bearing to fall out. If the hole is too big, the bearing is going to be loose and fall out. If it's too small, then the bearing will not fit. So this is a very, very key point of the actual project. Okay, so here we go. So with the hole that we have just created using the chisel, now we'll be able to slide it down over the blade. Okay, and very carefully we're going to turn on the machine. Now at this point, please make sure that you don't have the material in contact with the blade before you turn it on. So make sure that you are perfectly in the center of the hole, so it's safe to turn on the machine. The last thing we want is we don't want to have our material touching the blade when we turn it on, because it's going to jump. Okay, so position it nice and safely in the center of the hole, and we'll begin cutting now. Once you have removed this piece of material from the center of your fidget spinner, the next thing you need to do is you need to take the bearing and check if it fits. This is a very critical point because you have now removed this material from the center of your fidget spinner. It is a bit delicate, okay? So be very careful when you are actually putting the bearing into the piece that you don't press too hard. So what I advise you do is place the bearing and your piece of material, your fidget spinner design, together on the table and see if they fit. Now you can see mine doesn't actually fit. I have cut the hole a small bit too small, okay? Cutting the hole small is a lot better than cutting it too big. If you cut it too big, it's loose and it's not going to work. So cutting it on the safer side, so the smaller side, is much better. So now what I can do is I can take my sandpaper, and again, following the same design, I can just take the sandpaper, roll it up slightly into a little piece like that. And what I can do is I'm just going to put it inside the design, and I'm just going to very carefully sand it around. And what that's going to do is it's going to smooth out the inside and also increase the size of the hole, okay? So just do a small bit, don't go too much, because again, we don't want to go make the hole too big. Okay, so just sand it again. So once you have completed the sanding of your inside of your hole, now what we're going to do is we're going to very carefully press the bearing into the actual section here in the center of your fidget spinner. Okay, again, as I mentioned, be very careful because this is fragile now. The material has been removed from here. So when we are pressing the bearing through, be careful that you don't press too much and you don't snap your fidget spinner. Okay, so take the bearing, just check if it fits. Yep, fits okay. If it's a case you have a situation where it's a bit loose and the tolerances are not really good, what we can do is you can use a small bit of hot glue. Okay, so what I have here is I have a preheated glue gun. You can see the glue is ready. Okay, be very careful that you don't get the hot glue directly onto your hand. Okay, so what we're going to do is just directly onto the side of your fidget spinner, we're just going to put a very, very, very small amount of glue. So 1 and 2. Okay, so just a very small amount. And then what we're going to do is we're going to press our bearing through like so. Okay, be careful when you are placing the actual hot glue through onto the bearing, because if you put too much hot glue and you get hot glue going in here, what's going to happen is it's going to actually stop it from spinning. Okay, so be very careful when you are adding the hot glue to your fidget spinner and your bearing. Okay, so there we go. Hope you've enjoyed today's lesson where we made our own simple fidget spinner. For all of the details for this class, please check in the description down below. You can come into the studio lab and you can visit us here in Times Square Center on Shakeside Road, or you can do this from the comfort of your own home. All of the materials and all of the items that you will need will be provided for you to do this at home yourself. Hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope to see you again next time.